Hello and welcome. I'm Patrick Curtis, your host and chief monkey, and this is the Wall Street Oasis podcast. Join me as I talk to some of the community's most successful and inspirational members to gain valuable insight into different career paths and life in general. Let's get to it. In this episode, Mauricio MBA shares his path working at JP Morgan in the strategy and CFO office and his ability to make the jump to the structured products desk, how he transitioned to Barclays, eventually making his way into an impact investing role, as well as some important advice for younger listeners just starting out their careers. Enjoy.
So I started my career back in 2007. After studying a master's degree in the United Kingdom, I started working for JP Morgan. So my initial role was within the security services business. I used to work in an area that used to report to the CEO of that business, with a little bit of a strategy, finance. So we used to report for a while to the CFO of the business as well. From that, I moved to structured products within the investment bank, still at JP Morgan. As well. So it used to be an structured products relationship manager, covering the southern Europe sort of jurisdictions, if you like. So like Portugal, Spain.
And was that in London? Was that in London?
That was in London, yes.
Okay, great.
London, yeah.
And then
so after that, I had always had an interest for the capital markets, and not so much from a sort of product distribution perspective. In the beginning, at least, I wanted to move into especially equity capital markets, and it was interesting at that time. Basically, when I was trying to make the transition, Barclays just had acquired the institutional book of clients from Lehman Brothers. So Barclays, as you know, is a big fixed income house, but previous to that acquisition, basically they used to do equities advisory, not so much the execution aspect of things. So on the back of that acquisition, basically they started basically rolling out the full spectrum of services, basically from advisory to acquisition, and I was part of the teams that basically built the bank to start doing for the first time actually, in many occasions, the first public offerings, rights issue, and lots of different transactions, not only for the UK, but also for all the jurisdictions within Europe, such as
IPOs and secondaries and that type of stuff.
IPO, secondaries, rights issues, block transactions, lots of different other things as well, a little bit more complex as we started to kind of build on the momentum that we had back then and experience. And through the last couple of years, we started doing emerging markets as well. So we did quite a lot of IPOs in Poland, Georgia, South Africa, Turkey, actually. So we worked on the Pegasus IPO, and lots of different other transactions, basically, which were quite interesting experiences to have been involved on.
Very cool.
So post that, and I guess that takes me where I'm currently, I guess, is that after a while and after managing a team within the equities business, I used to sit with the syndicate desk within the equities business. I kind of started to challenge myself in terms of what I wanted to do next, and I wanted to make sure that I didn't just throw away my finance experience, but at the same time, wanted to make sure that what I was doing had some meaning for me personally, very very openly. So I started to kind of explore alternatives in terms of where that could be, and came across impact investment, and after speaking to someone in the UK and happens to have a investment boutique that focuses on the very kind of impact first aspect of the spectrum, and again by coincidence and chance and luck, Barclays was going through a transition where after the financial crisis and all this stuff that we got involved and we got really badly hit for, the fund created a new strategy. They were trying to kind of focus new initiatives to make sure that they had an element of like societal impact, so to speak. So they used to talk about that in the terms of share growth, kind of sort of leveraging the term of David Porter's share value. which is
Yep.
basically where can we find commercial opportunities where we can bring our core expertise and also generate some sort of value. And then at the back of that strategy, they created a venture capital fund, like an internal capital venture capital fund, effectively to fund initiatives, strategic initiatives within the bank to kind of de-risk those initiatives from the business lines basically acquiring and then kind of
So
launching
within
them
Barclays, there was a fund
within.
specifically focused on sustainable and impact investing, and
that's that's right.
you worked
So
leading that division.
say again, sorry.
You were leading that division. You were leading that group.
No. So the fund was created. It was part of group and reported into the office of the CEO,
Mhm.
and it used to be called Social Innovation Facility. This fund,
Mhm.
and basically I applied for some funding. There was someone else as well within the wealth management and private banking division applying for some funding for some initiatives that had a
Sorry. What was that?
lot of.
I lost you there a little bit. Sorry.
So
Can you
so so
sorry, slow
basically,
down. Just slow down because I can't. I
yeah.
can't understand. Yeah. Very good. You speak
So
fast, and there's
yeah, no,
and you have a slight accent. I don't know if it's. I think you have a slight British Spanish accent, which is rare.
yeah, I know it's Colombian,
Ah, mi
but
madre es de Cali, Colombia.
sí,
Yeah.
muy bien, there you
Yeah.
go. So okay, so Social Innovation Facility was this internal VC fund within the group
Hmm.
to finance initiatives that had this angle to it. So the way you will go about getting funding was that they used to do like annual calls for bids, and like you basically come up with a proposal and you will get different rounds of funding. Like from discovery funding, it starts at 50K to like 500,000, and then um, depending on your
Okay.
idea, it could
Well,
be
let's
2 to 5 million.
let's go back to the beginning. I want to hear more about your story. I want to hear more about like how you even broke into JP Morgan to start. So you started at the strategy transformational change kind of CFO office. Is that
That's
correct?
right. That's
And that
right.
was in London.
Uh, uh, that was initially in Dorset. There's
Where?
an office in Dorset in the United Kingdom.
Okay.
It's based location just a couple of hours away from London. I think, but part of the reasons why I ended up landing within that job was that prior to my experience in the financial services industry, I studied engineering and a bit of work in project management. So having that experience before was very handy because a lot of what we used to do within strategic planning was effectively managing portfolios and different initiatives that require you to have that sort of end-to-end project management experience, which regardless of where you are in banking, I think is useful, but having it for that specific role, it was very valuable.
Yeah, you were there.
I
You were
think
there for you were there for 3 years, correct?
that's right.
And so in those 3 years, can you just give me an example of something you did in a specific day or week so that the listeners can kind of know what a transformational change in CFO office, what somebody coming out of school, what do they typically do? Or if you know how it's changed nowadays, do you know?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So in essence, they look after the broad portfolio of initiatives that are getting funding through the business. They used to have different sort of strategic objectives for the business, if you like. So many of them would be revolving around cost reduction. Some of them would be revolving about automation and efficiency. They used to basically these world security services business used to service large pension funds and large institutional investors, and they
Mhm.
used to service the securities that basically they have within a custodian. So some elements will be around, the integration systems, integration of processes and whatnot. Some other elements of the business will be focused on, for instance, making sure that you reduce the cost to the client by making sure that they can use the securities they're holding and lending those securities for other businesses. So there used to be like a really dynamic business called securities lending, effectively, that basically they use for the prime brokerage business.
And
So
should I think of this group, the strategy transformational change or CFO office? Is it like CFO office for just the UK or is this global? And like
that
how
was
do
global.
it's
Yeah, that was
global?
global.
And
Yeah.
so when you're supporting this office, how should I think of the structure? Is it like the CFO is at the top, and then how does it work? Are there like a few people underneath him working on different projects, or how did they structure it?
Yeah, so they used to have you have so there was this office basically kind of looking after the European business, but the CFO has an entire office which
Hmm.
has some sort of regional offices as well in London and some in New York. They will have basically different directors, and all of them will basically report into CEO. Basically, it works in a kind of hierarchical way, if you like, where you have CFO each individual region, and you have direct reports into him, basically looking after different portfolio initiatives or reporting responsibilities, if you like, to the CFO. From a finance perspective, I think you have, from an analyst perspective, I guess you have quite a lot of exposure actually how you go about accounting and finance management at a large corporation. That obviously involves a lot of number crunching, lots of reporting, data analysis. I mean, the more you know about how to, even like, it may sound silly, but actually having like a really good grasp of using BVA and Excel is massively useful. You know,
Did
presentations and
you
whatnot. But
when you were working there?
um,
Were you a VBA guru, an Excel guru? You got better.
a little bit, but I definitely got much better working at a specific role. I think having studied engineering was useful for me because we had to do modeling and stuff. So I had some good knowledge about that, but I got challenged basically when I started that job,
I'm
and
sure.
I ended up improving as a result of it. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, you were
It's
there. So how did you make that internal switch to equity finance or structured products? Like, how was it something where you went to your boss and you had been there long enough and built that relationship and were able to make the transition, or were you networking internally to talking to the other kind of MDs in equity finance?
yeah. So it was actually the latter. So I did have the support from my MD. I mentioned to him that I want to kind of transition to a more commercial role. So I had his support to start doing the transition, making time for interviews, traveling wherever and whatever else. But that was right at the I mean, not right at the beginning, but actually the financial crisis was kind of still around. So it actually took me quite a lot of interviewing to make that transition, especially because I wasn't coming from a role doing the same role. I mean, making lateral transitions within the market is usually much straightforward than actually coming from Australia and then coming into structured products. But
Right. So you're
it,
saying coming internally from a totally different group was much harder than, say, somebody lateraling from another bulge bracket bank that had already been doing structured products.
yeah, and coming from different function as well,
Different function. Okay.
if you like. So I mean, JP Morgan as a bank has a really good process in terms of promoting internal mobility.
Hmm.
But even so, sometimes it's difficult. I mean, it could be that you have within a specific division they have an open role and they almost sort of in the beginning holding that role for people within the same division. So you need to kind of learn how to navigate those different sort of nuances.
And there
Um,
weren't a lot of
uh,
open roles back then because it was 2010, 11. So it was
no,
interesting.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It was difficult. I think if I recall correctly, it could have taken me easily like 25 interviews to actually land this job. But it's what it takes
What do you think
sometimes.
what do you think made the difference on when you finally did get it in that last one, the
Well,
job that you actually got?
yeah, I think with all things, when you start interviewing for jobs, part of your training is actually going into having like a really crafted CV that can actually land you the interviews, but then going into the interviews and with every interview you improve yourself and you actually start realizing the elements where you have gaps and weaknesses that you're not covering very well. In some cases, it could be that you have that within your experience, whether it is at a previous job or the university, whatever. But the realization that you failing to actually explain something well makes you or helps you actually taking a step back and thinking about that and then doing it better in the next interview. So I think at the end of that process, I was interviewing really well and and actually interestingly, by the time I got this job, I also have another two offers as well for the jobs,
Isn't that
which kind of
interesting how after 20 interviews, you're a lot better at interviewing? It's not surprising.
yes, I know. It is something that you craft and you polish and I guess you get good at. Um, so yeah, so that was, but to your question back again, it took a lot of interviewing and at the same time a lot of networking. So the opportunity to interview for that specific role came through a recommendation from someone, and then I had a chat with those guys 6 months before actually for the job. At that time, it happened, but then, and that's another thing actually that I think is worth sort of mentioning to people going through this process at the moment, and is that the fact that you go through an interview and it's not successful doesn't mean that it cannot be for a future opportunity. And like this specific role and the one that I had later on at Barclays, both of them came through teams that I had actually interviewed before, and despite it didn't happen in the beginning, it happened like 6 months or 12 months later. So always make sure that you keep those channels open and you leave a good impression, I guess, after those processes, because you never know when they could be around back again.
So even after you had been
Um,
even after you had been rejected for certain seats, you were still good about reaching up, say 6 months later, 3 months later, saying, "Hey, just letting you know
yeah,
how things are going."
yeah. I think it's a combination of two things. What one is that I guess having left a good impression through the interviewing process and whatnot, so they see the value in you, and for whatever reason they may end up having or finding someone that it was better prepared, had experience or whatever. But obviously I left a good impression, so they actually thought of me for when they had a different opportunity.
Mhm.
And the second one is that I have always tried. Can realize that if you work in finance, you need to, even if it doesn't come naturally in you, you need to make an effort to always reaching out to people, developing your network, and trying to network as much as you can, because relational capital in this industry is very valuable. So I always kind of made an effort of like touching base, every 6 months or whatever else, being active on LinkedIn, connecting to all those people. So even though you're not connecting with them or talking to them directly, through your engagements or comments or activity in social media, for instance, they could at least see that you're quite interested in the industry, that you have something to contribute, that you have ideas and whatnot. And then just by being present, basically, people think of you when an opportunity comes around.
Yeah, you kind of hang around the hoop, I say. You hang around the hoop
Yeah.
long enough, and eventually there's a
Yeah.
job to be had, and they think of you right away because they had just recently talked to you or whatnot. But so tell me, in the
Yeah.
first job out of school, so it sounded like VBA and Excel were really important. Tell me about the tools for this equity finance or the structured products thing. Like, what, in terms of the listeners, what helped you there? Just more Excel, more VBA, more modeling, or was there a different?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Okay.
Excel, PBA modeling, and that is about it. Obviously, if you look into enter that industry, studying structured products and derivatives is obviously very valuable, because the responsibility you will have right away is it requires you to have that knowledge.
How should
The
people think
less
of structured products? When you say structured products, can you give examples of what that is and like what you were doing on the structured products desk for the bank?
the equity option swaps, interest rate swaps. There's
Are
a
you were
different
you
range of them.
creating these instruments like actually from scratch and helping sell them, or what were you um, were you like advising companies on how to do it? Or what was the
So the way that the business is structured is that they have different trading desks and different sales desks.
Mhm.
They all kind of focus on different types of products. So you have like Delta One and like type of more vanilla flow type of products, where they basically focus on the standard derivatives that they sell by bulk. There are some other more exotic types of products that are basically served through more specialized desks that almost tailor-made different products for the different needs of different investors. Um, uh, the Depending on the area where you see it in the business that you support, the level of knowledge you will need around the products themselves obviously will be different effectively.
okay.
Um, but in essence, this role wasn't much to do with the design of the products themselves, as the role of the traders themselves, especially if you're working in the exotics products. But actually, this specific business was aligned to sales. So once a product has been agreed with a counterpart, and then is going to become a contractual agreement, then there's a lot of negotiation between commercial terms, dates, different sort of schedules in terms of where the payouts for different events of the structure program. I think whenever the different events of the structure program happened, and actually in the sort of process as well of making sure that contractually you are actually in line with the expectations of the economics of the product, you need to be leading liaising with clients all the time. So
Got it.
this is almost what happens once you have agreed on a specific need and a specific pricing of the product, and then everything that happens thereafter basically will be looking after. If that makes any sense.
Got it. Okay. So you were only there for about, so you worked really long and hard to get into that structured products desk at JP Morgan. And then you were there for only about a year before jumping to a new bulge bracket, also
That's
also
right.
in London. So tell me, what was the thought process on that? Were you recruited? Or did they reach out to you? Were you starting to look kind of outside because you'd been there at JP for a while? Tell me the thought process of just career-wise,
Sure.
why you thought it was a good time.
Sure. I think the general idea of making that initial transition was actually to work on a more commercial role, I guess, than what I was doing back in strategy. Once I moved into the business, which I quite enjoyed, I can realize as well the competition in order to be able to move up the ladder was going to be very fierce. And at the same time, whilst I was still back in structured products in JP Morgan, at some point I was approached by a headhunter to speak to some of the people at Barclays Capital. I went and interviewed for that specific role. Went through like 2 or 3 rounds of interviews. Can't quite remember at the moment. They ended up finding someone else that had some experience from a different bank. And then a year later, they approached me back again. They said they have a new role back again. Would you be interested to talk to them back again? Because I have previously left a good impression, I guess. It was kind of much straightforward, I guess. It was almost like an update. This is where we are. This is what happened last time. And the person that we have recruited back then has moved to Australia. Here's the opportunity. What you think? And kind of after can happen really really easy actually somehow. So yeah,
And so were you given
that
it?
was.
Was it a similar role in equity capital markets at Barclays, or were you doing similar things?
No, it was a much more broad role in terms of responsibility and scope. It was kind of the responsibility was, and this is what kind of appealed to me as well. I think I consider myself to be, I guess, quite entrepreneurial in approach and spirit,
Mhm.
and this is one of the things that I loved about Barclays, which is it's a bank that is really open to new initiatives, to giving you responsibility to run with things and actually being able to execute and show what you're capable of. Whereas in other bulge bracket banks that are so large, such as is the case with JP Morgan, I guess, everything is so well established and set up that oftentimes you end up just focusing on one specific activity. And at least for me, personally, it wasn't the right match. At Barclays, responsibility was basically we're starting up this new business. We have basically the responsibility to work out how we go about doing execution and ensuring that the business continue to grow by X multiples on a year-to-year basis. You're going to be playing a key role within that setting.
That's awesome. So you were there for a good 3 years doing that, and then you eventually started moving over to something called impact, I guess, impact private assets, or is this when you started kind of going to the sustainable and impact investing space?
Yeah, so I did that for 3 years and a half, and was managing the team by the time I leave,
Mhm.
and then I mentioned that this thing happened within the bank. They created this social innovation facility, which is like an internal VC fund. They were funding initiatives for people that would basically put them forward, and the more aligned they were to the strategic priorities of the business, the more senior management support they had, and if they had a team or whatever else, they will have different levels of support. I
Can you
put
give me
forward.
can you give me some examples of investments that they made, or just of types of investments they would look at? Like when you say sustainable impact investing, is this like solar? Is this wind? Is this like microfinance in
No,
developing?
bear in mind this all they were only financing internal initiatives in order to
Internal.
enable all the businesses to actually focus on those type of plays. So things that they have funded, uh, for instance, was what I ended up doing thereafter, which is basically I put a proposal forward for us to see if we could leverage something that we had done previously in the investment bank to do retail distribution of initial public offerings. Basically, the story goes like this. So back in the financial crisis, there were a few companies that were bailed out by the UK government. But
Mm-hmm.
after some years, the government needed to kind of sell back to the market in order to be able to get a capital back, if you like.
Yep.
But because they were bailed out by the government needed to make sure that the public was also able to subscribe for shares in this public offering. So we had the Royal Mail Group and the Direct Line Group, for instance, where two of the few that basically we were part of. If I recall correctly, by the time we were given a role within the transaction, we only had a role basically to do retail distribution, which none of the UK banks have done before. So we ended up doing a joint venture with almost like a broker basically in the UK that helped us coordinating and onboarding within the investment bank platform at least like 80 basically brokers basically used to do distribution to retail investors. And then through them, we didn't have any restrictions that investment banks usually have around IPO distribution. So that went well. And after that, we end up taking those type of roles in different transactions going forward. And because of that innovation, basically, I wanted to see if we were able to use the same distribution channel to facilitate subscription and distribution of sustainable investment products, which until now, a lot of discussion in the market was around there is interest in the retail market, but banks are not really well placed to do that. So that was my idea. I put forward the idea for funding, end up kind of competing against another idea within the wealth management division, which was kind of focused on the same thing, but at the same time, it makes sense because wealth managers actually cut and serve retail clients from retail, like properly retail, to affluent, high net worth, and ultra high net worth.
So if I'm asking, if this is correct, if I summarize, so you were saying through the same distribution channel that you guys had used before, you're saying, why don't we offer products around sustainable impact investing through that?
Yeah, exactly.
And
using a specific distribution channel that we have enabled through the investment bank.
And so you were doing that for a while, it sounds like, or it went well?
Yeah. So what happened was that rather than getting funding for that specific idea, the proposal that was made by this internal funding fund within Barclays was, why don't you join forces with the other guy that's doing this at Barclays Wealth and then launch this business. So that's what the short of it, basically what I end up doing. I end up
joined forces with the wealth management guy or gal.
Yeah. So at that specific time, we didn't have the funding itself. There was a guy within the wealth management division that had gotten almost $500,000, actually a little bit more than $500,000. Actually, it was over like $800,000 basically to run with the pre-feasibility stage of that specific idea. What we ended up doing was I was working for a while with the global head of behavioral and quant research, and we ended up doing basically a research in which we got 2,000 high net worth individuals from retail to high net worth individuals actually to studying how they were thinking of doing sustainable investments, what a sustainable investment will need to look like, the characteristics, the features, the risk return profiles, the type of service that they want to see from a wealth manager, whatever else, in order for us to be able to take those views and then being able to design a proposition that will have market fit. So in doing that, we ended up doing that, published a paper on that, and then the back of it, did a business case that allows to basically launch properly the business within the wealth management division as a properly established division as opposed to like a project, and then end up getting financing from the social innovation facility as well as the investment products division within the wealth management.
So you got it off the ground, basically. It's a long road to get up.
Yeah, pretty much. After a year, we got off the ground, and then we did many different things within that. That was a tremendous experience. We launched the first fund of funds, like mutual funds that focus on sustainable investment strategies that existed for retail distribution. We launched a discretionary sustainable investment strategy for high net worth families and university endowments in the private bank.
Very cool.
Platform of mutual funds, from like ETFs, mutual funds, English products, and lots of different things. So it was almost like launching a startup with that within the comfort of of a big
Yeah,
bank.
exactly. Yeah, it's funny because I've spoken with some guests. They've been worked at venture funds at these large firms, and it's nice because you have that safety and the resources to pull on if you find something interesting. So it sounds like you had a lot of success there. You were kind of co-head of that impact investing, division or whatnot, or you helped launch did the research and all that. And you were doing that for almost 5 years. Tell me what kind of prompted you last year to kind of start again, or were you kind of already doing stuff on the side, or
I think one of the things that I was kind of doing as an additional responsibility that I just kind of give myself as well through the development of this business was originating deal flow, private asset deal flow for distribution in the private bank. So
Mhm.
anything to do with sustainable investment, basically, will have to go through our desk. We will do an element of selection in it. We end up actually developing a robust sort of framework for us to be able to select investment deal flow based on sustainable investment criteria
Well,
before we will
these were direct investments into individual companies, or they were funds that you were analyzing?
direct and funds. Yeah.
Okay.
So the way it works, the way distribution works within the private bank, this is that, well, at least within Barclays, and I think it's the similar case for the institutions, is that you have one simpler distribution channel, which is basically like a placement agent model, where basically either direct or funded, you look at deal flow that have the characteristics that you want to see in a, like a mainstream placement agent type of house, like a good team, good brand. Sizes will be ranging from anything from 5 million to 30 million if it was direct. If it
Hmm.
was funded, it would be potentially be in funds between 30 million to 100 million.
Hmm.
But if it was to be a fund, you will normally look at funds that have a more differentiating strategy, basically. So something that will make them unique and specifically play that, and the specific investor basically will invest in it because he happens to have an interest in, I don't know, it could be like artificial intelligence, it would be agri-tech, or it would be microfinance. So something that has been more niche and kind of helps as a sort of satellite play, if you like.
So this specific initiative, you were looking at both funds and direct investments, and this was capital being deployed by Barclays, like the actual capital by the
Yeah.
bank, or this was sorry, yeah, go ahead. So explain it to me because
Sure. No, yeah, no, absolutely. So everything that the bank does within the wealth management and private banking division is client money. So
clients, yeah.
since the financial crisis with Volcker's rule, with Volcker's rules and whatever else, uh, banks are quite restricted
But you were packaging,
from doing
this
direct
stuff,
investments.
but you were packaging
Um,
this stuff up for potential.
selection distribution, and in some cases you do packaging, so that's the case of the fund of funds, but in the majority of the cases what you're really doing is just originating and applying like institutional due diligence and basically doing distribution, so placing
Okay,
those type of deals with clients effectively.
got
So
it.
that is specific distribution channel wasn't even so much of like basically you don't do any advisory, basically you almost really just place the deals through the networks that you have within the bank. So you almost kind of end up know which type of private bankers basically will have specific clients that will have an interest. You basically disseminate information, and then the bankers will be doing the introductions. That has evolved a little bit. Now they have digital platforms through which they can actually do a more efficient distribution process, because being that activity as restricted as it is in the UK, it is difficult for instance for a private banker to actually coordinate and arrange things beyond sharing commercial documentation. So
Yep.
digital channels allows you to do that. There's no distribution channel whereby you actually have your sales force actually doing an advisory activity and actually prospecting thousands of clients in order to be able to actually close in with a specific investment. So within that one, the numbers tend to be much larger.
Hmm.
um, uh, you could find direct, but less so. I think the majority of the transactions that we use to support through that distribution channel were funds, usually funds beyond the 300 million mark to a couple of billion. And the way the business will normally go about that deal flow is that they like to see that a fund or project had at least secured a first round or close, that they had some institutional names,
LP. Yep.
as investors and LPs. And with all that, basically, you're kind of ensuring that you have other people that has done institutional due diligence on it. We will anyways get due diligence done by a third party as well to kind of ensure that you also almost have like an additional process in it, securing, ensuring that you have a quality transaction of quality. And then obviously the private assets team will basically conduct a extra due diligence on it. They will go to investment committees, and then it supports the end up basically being a project that can take up to 6 months.
Cool.
You'll be normally looking at, supporting rounds of anything from $50 to $75 million, basically in one single go.
That's great. So tell me a little bit about kind of what's next for you, and what's the next jump. Recently, you kind of started. Is it Samidia?
Yeah. So in essence, I had a personal kind of plan for a long time, which was basically returning to the country where I come from, which is Colombia. And since we had 2 children, that kind of puts in context sometimes your priorities. I mean, everyone has different sort of priorities and whatever else. But for me, it was really important for them to grow close to family. So left Barclays in June last year. It's formally, actually, kind of informally left back in February.
Mm-hmm.
But I also wanted to kind of somehow make sure that what I was going to do next was really, really aligned to making sure that has that impact element of things. So I was going to get some time off actually after I left, and second coffee on the first week I left, ended up talking to someone that happens to be the right hand of someone that is actually quite recognized in the venture capital industry in the UK and the impact investment industry for the matter, which is Sir Ronnie Cohen. So Ronald Cohen is I believe is still chair and a partner of Apax Partners.
Mm-hmm.
But like 15, 20 years ago, he decided that he wanted to do the same thing that he did for the venture capital industry in the UK for the sustainable impact investment industry. So he chairs different organizations within the UK. One of them is a private equity fund called Bridges Fund Management. Another one called Social Finance, which is an advisory firm. He helped funding Big Society Capital, which is like a wholesale bank in the UK for this type of investments. And back in 2010, David Cameron, the former Prime Minister of the UK, tasked him to share an initiative that used to be called the E85 Task Force for Impact Investment.
Mm-hmm.
Which basically was intention was getting the G8 countries basically to commit pushing this agenda through public policy, public and private partnerships and investments. That G8 organization evolved to become these days what is called the Global Steering Group for Impact Investment, the GSG.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been helping launching basically outcomes-based finance funds for some years now. They wanted to do something around migration. And basically the short story of it is that basically end up setting up my firm very, very, very soon, and the fund that we're looking to launch around migration in Latin America actually is almost like it's almost like the first mandate, but I'm quite involved in it. So we'll see what the future holds in terms of that. A lot of it is spending fundraising effectively for us to be able to actually structure illegally and start proper fundraising activity back in 2022. But it is really exciting. It's really, the job will be done here in Colombia, which kind of brought me to the country back again, which was the ultimate goal as well. And yeah, is I have
Are you in
acquired.
Colombia right now?
I am, yes.
Where? Bogota?
In Medellin, actually.
Medellin. Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's awesome, man. Congrats on kind of seeing your priorities, and with the 2 young kids, I know how it is, and
Thank you.
it's great. It's great that you're kind of following that impact investing, the stuff that you're more passionate about, and kind of staying along with that.
Yeah, thank you. But I hope the experience helps, I guess. So I love, one of the interesting things that I learned while doing this at Barclays was that there's huge interest in the industry, especially like within the younger generation, to ensure that they not only equip themselves with the hard skills that they acquire through doing jobs in banking and and finance, but also making sure that they can actually take that somewhere else that is relevant for them. And I can tell you that we used to have at least 30 people a week approaching us through LinkedIn to everywhere, asking us, would you have a role there? Can I do an internship there? Whatever else. And I guess a piece of advice for that is that if you can acquire those skill set that become valuable from a finance perspective is great, but also make sure that you continue to build on as well on other aspects of that nascent industry, so you can make the transition at some point. But there's plenty going on at the moment around that field. I mean, you see BlackRock recent letter to the CEOs of the companies. Like every year they're coming up with this thing where they're basically saying, as a larger asset manager, they want to see companies are able to evidence the impact in society. Fund managers from private to public markets are launching new strategies around this. Family offices, endowments are fully focused on this thing. Governments started to rethink as well how they do public and private partnerships and actually focus on outcomes as opposed to just public service delivery. So there's plenty going on that I think will allow a lot of people that has this interest to make that transition at some point. But also, but I guess my piece of advice is make sure that you plan ahead and you equip yourself with the skill set so that transition is easier than it was probably for me, I guess.
So just early on, yeah, well, as an engineer, it's tough, right? You had to learn on the job more. But that's cool, man. So you're saying get the technical skills, but there will be the opportunity, since impact investing and sustainable investing is growing so rapidly, and people and large institutions are now becoming more focused on it.
Yeah, absolutely. And make sure you reach out to people that, like oftentimes just offering your skill set to less well-defined projects. I mean, is something that is undervalued, because oftentimes just by getting involved, getting engaged, getting involved within a specific audience or community allows you to tap into the network, start acquiring different skills that you wouldn't normally be acquiring through your day-to-day job in investment banking or whatever else. And then at some point, all the different steps kind of start adding up and get to the profile you need to be able to make it to the door to do a different thing if that's what you're looking to do.
Makes sense. So like join associations that are in the areas that you want to be, and likewise, so that you're not just developing the network, you're developing the skills too. Even if you have to work for free, a little bit.
Yeah, I mean that's yeah. So sometimes people tend to overlook those opportunities because they think if they can't afford to pay you a salary, or because the specific project may be at a stage where it doesn't provide you, a move right away, then you tend to think it may not be a good opportunity, but you will be surprised how many people is actually working on tremendous initiatives that happen to be connected to ludicrous networks that at some point actually make that tipping point and then launch. So that's one thing. I mean, if you look at qualifications as well that you just mentioned, like the CFA just recently launched a pilot for an ESG qualification as well that people can take and start kind of focusing on ESG equities research as well for a lot of people that's looking to make the transition. The Kaya, which is the one that I made, has also some modules around long-term portfolio investment, some elements around integrating climate change within investment strategies, ESG.
Yeah, ESG is really big. ESG is really big right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it is.
Very cool. Well, anything else you want to share with the listeners, or any advice you'd give to your younger self? Now, kind of being everything that you went through, that you would tell to the younger listeners.
Probably the only one piece of advice I would give my younger self, I guess, is taking the time to actually understand what are your life's priorities, your life's interests, even your life's values, because there will be a lot of situations through your career where you get tested on those assumptions and that knowledge, if you like. And I think if you actually take that time to actually understand that, and you start up your career with really clear clarity of what is it that you want to do and the sort of things that you don't want to compromise in order to be able to become successful, I think it becomes a much easier endeavor to actually make career progression decisions, commitments, and transitions as well, if you were, as you start moving up.
I love that. You
But
have a
yeah,
you have a North Star that you go toward, and you understand your values and your core beliefs, and it's
I think no, exactly, because I mean, from my personal experience, I've worked with a lot of people that came from families where they had lawyers and bankers within the family, and they just know that they want to be a banker and MD in X number of years, and that's good and well if that's based on their own understanding. That's what they want to do. But equally, I met so many people that at some point in their careers, having made it to associate VP, were a bit lost in terms of what they want to do next. And so oftentimes sacrificing like family, personal relations to something that wasn't 100% what they want, to something that they weren't 100% sure is what they wanted to be doing in the next decade. I think when you get to those type of situations, then it is really difficult. So it becomes a challenge for you, not only sort of professionally, but at the same time personally. So I think the more clear you are around what you want to do, then you make more conscious decisions around that. If you want to be a banker, then do a banker, put your time, put the work, find a partner also that can support you in that aspiration, and then all the best to you. But if you happen to have all the priorities in life aside as well of being a finance professional, then start with that clarity, and based on that, you will have different options with the financial services industry that actually could have a really good fit. And banking is great and allows you to have a skill set that is incredibly valuable in the industry, but equally there's various other avenues that oftentimes people don't know of that can be very attractive actually career transition as well. Like private banking and wealth management is incredibly interesting as well because they handle with individuals, their families, the endowments, the type of clients that you're actually servicing that oftentimes actually become prospective clients to your ex-colleagues in the investment bank. So that's something that is interesting. If you happen to be good at investment analysis or running portfolios and happen to kind of or potentially be thinking of working in asset management or fund management industry, there's different culture, different sort of aspects to those type of career paths that may be more aligned to your priorities and your personality and whatever else. So I think take your time to kind of explore what is in finance and all the different avenues that there are. Network actively and meet people across different
functions.
Because oftentimes you find lots of people working within investment banking that only network with people within investment banking and they just keep talking about the same things day in day out. Whereas in networking with people across the spectrum in financial services, you get to understand how finance actually works in a much broader sense.
Yeah.
And at the same time, find opportunities for potential transitions, if you like, or actually end up finding out that there's other areas within finance that happen to be quite attractive because you happen to have an interest and then you have a skill set and could actually be a good transition for you as well. So I think taking the time to actually have that understanding before you start making those initial decisions as to where you want to focus at a stage where you're just starting is incredibly valuable because it will save you years of time before you start thinking of those later on, where oftentimes making those transitions is actually much harder.
Yeah, and I harp on that all the time. I always say to the listeners and to the community that investment banking or private equity is not the only path to success. There's many other paths of ways to be not just happy or not just wealthy, but happy. You can be wealthy and happy. And you can have a life, and there's other ways. And hopefully some of the people we're profiling on this podcast and in the community kind of opens everybody's eyes a little bit to how different everyone's backgrounds are and how many different roles there are within even a large bulge bracket bank there. So there's a lot of different ways to be successful. So Mauricio, thanks so much for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, buddy. Cheers.
And thanks to you, my listeners at Wall Street Oasis. If you have any suggestions whatsoever, please don't hesitate to send them my way, Patrick at wallstreetoasis.com. And until next time.